So, you've all been waiting for the JFK section. Let's bring in Randy Benson. Hey, Randy, whereabouts are you?
Hey, I'm in Durham, North Carolina,
Oh,
in
well,
the
huge
States.
thank you for coming on and spending time with us. Ash informed me that you spent 14 years making this bloody film about the assassination of JFK. What first got you interested into that subject?
Well, I've always been a history buff, and what really interested me was the researchers and why people would research a topic that was decades old, and who were these people? And so that's what started me on the journey of making the film about the research community.
And which way do you lean then? Do you lean more towards Jim Mars, that kind of viewpoint, or more towards the official narrative?
Oh, I definitely, after spending so much time, it's very clear that the researchers have uncovered, you know, they uncovered 13 million pages of classified documents through the JFK Records Act, and I think that to believe the official narrative, the Warren Commission narrative, is a bit naive. Um, the last official government, U.S. government proclamation was that there was a conspiracy. So that's kind of where we are now until the rest of the documents are released and we can hopefully get a much broader perspective of what happened in 63 and throughout the Kennedy presidency. So,
I'm
yeah,
with you.
I lean more towards Penn Jones and John Judge and the other characters in my film.
I'm absolutely with you there, Randy. And I'm going to ask the viewers, put a one in the chat if you think the official narrative was absolute BS on JFK's assassination. Put a two in the chat if you believe everything the Warren Commission said and you love the official narrative. I know which way that's going to go. So let's break it down then. What are the biggest holes in the official narrative? I mean, how could this guy with this lame gun that barely cost anything, that couldn't even shoot straight, how could he have performed this massive crime of the century?
Right. Well, he's what the researchers I've studied revealed, and what the documents have revealed was that um, he was indeed a patsy. There was a huge push against any critics of the Warren Report, and that CIA document 1035-960 that Robert Groden revealed. Um, and it's very clear, there's so many points to this, but the fact that Oswald was seen on the second floor immediately following the assassination by Officer Marion Baker, reveals that he was not on the sixth floor. So it's as simple as that. And the work of Cyril Wecht, who's in my film, the forensic pathology work that he's done on the assassination, reveals that there's no way the magic bullet could have made all the wounds. I mean,
Do
there's
you
more metal in Connolly's leg while he's sitting in a grave right now than is missing from CE 399.
Do you subscribe to the triangulation theory then? Because the video that shows him, it appears that bullets are coming from various directions.
I do, and again, that's based on other researchers' work, the work of Tink Thompson, Josiah Thompson, Penn Jones, John Judge, Mark Lane. So yes, I do.
And do you think that those hitmen then were just cleared out, got clear out of the scene? I read one theory that Barry Seal, the pilot who was involved with the CIA drug drops, was involved in picking one of the hitmen up. Do you know anything about the logistics of the hitmen?
I do not. I do not. But there are rumors that E. Howard Hunt was, from Watergate fame, um, was the carrier to the safe house um, of payment to the hitmen. And that was confirmed by um, Marita Lorenz in testimony to a court. So, these are things that deserve a lot more research. Um, I have an interesting story to tell about my dad, if I may.
Please.
My dad was in the fighter interceptor squadron at Hahn Air Base in Germany during the assassination, and he was on the front line of the Cold War. And so during those years, um, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, fighter interceptors would fly the east-west German border, Soviet MiG on this side and American plane on this side, and they would fly the east-west German border. And my dad would always say, if a Russian did anything, he would be scrambled because that was the front line of the Cold War. But my father, on the day of the assassination, wasn't scrambled and found out about the assassination while he was at dinner at the officers club. Someone came in and said something. And so that always gave him pause, great pause, because the fact that, he was scrambled when the assassination attempt on de Gaulle, for instance, and um, whenever anything in the world would happen, he was always in the air. But at that time, they weren't scrambled, and he just knew something was up. And so maybe that's what really piqued my interest in the case. To get back to your first question.
So we know about the massive amount of people that were executed, went missing, assassinated surrounding the JFK
Mhm.
assassination. But I don't know what happened to the researchers. So what did happen to the researchers then? What kind of stories you got there?
Oh gosh. Well, we know from CIA documents that were released under the JFK Records Act that they were being watched, um, all the way up until the 1990s. We have documents saying that were, memos that were sent back to the CIA that researchers were being watched. Um, I I have a really interesting um, event that happened to me about a year ago. Yeah, so I was at my local library branch giving a talk on the assassination, just what I call JFK 101, just the basics. And there were two men in the back in suits, looking out of place. And afterwards, they came to me and said, "We're from the National Archives, and we drove down to North Carolina from DC for your talk." And I was like, "Why would you drive from DC for a little JFK talk?" And they just said, "We found it very interesting." They gave me their card. They were from the Office of General Counsel. And then they drove back to DC. And so that asks, why would they possibly care about someone like me giving a talk at my local library branch? But there they were. I have the card in my wallet, just just as a little reminder
That's scary,
of these
isn't it?
things.
Have you
Yeah.
heard of any researchers suffering violence or getting killed themselves?
Well, there's speculation that Mae Brussel was was taken out. Um, there was a lot of evidence that she was being watched and surveilled from a house across the street, and she she died under mysterious circumstances. She died immediately, and there was no autopsy, um, and that was it. So that's just one of many. I know that researchers like Sylvia Marr, early researchers, first generation researchers, were constantly threatened, um, constantly under surveillance. And even the second generation researchers like John Judge and Walt Brown have been surveilled and watched closely. So,
How do you define first and second generation researchers?
well, the first generation researchers were the ones who started on the day of the assassination. So, um, Jim Mars, Robert Groden, Penn Jones, of course, um, Mary Farrell, Sylvia Marr, Josiah Thompson, Mark Lane, of course, and Vince Salandria, for instance. And there are a host that I'm not naming right now, but yes, it's and the second generation researchers were those that were mentees of the first generation. So researchers like the star of my film, the central character of my film is John Judge, and he was a mentee of Penn Jones from Midlothian, Texas. So he's considered second generation, and he picked up where Penn left off and focused. He got out of Dealey Plaza early and focused on the whys of why Kennedy was killed, and that led him to focus on the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs.
There has
So,
been there's been so much speculation about why he has been killed, and Cuba, military industrial complex, oil interests, taxes being raised on oil owners, the CIA threatening to decimate them into a million pieces, or whatever his famous quote was. From doing all your research then over all of these years, what is your take on why he was assassinated?
well, all of the things you just listed, of course. Um, but what we know from just the documents, National Security Action Memo 263 was signed in October of 63, which was the withdrawal order from Vietnam. And the first 1,000 officers or first 1,000 soldiers were removed before Christmas of 63, or in November of 63. And the full withdrawal was ordered by the end of 65. Kennedy was killed on the 22nd November, and in one of LBJ's first meetings, he signed National Security Action Memo 273, which reversed 263, ordered an escalation of covert action, and was basically the Vietnam War. So I think, my gut and what I see from the documents is that the biggest reason was Vietnam. And there were a host of other reasons. Like you said, um, the oil issue, him standing with the steel workers over the steel mill owners, his policy towards the third world and anti-colonialism, was another massive nail in his coffin. And then, of course, the peace speech that he gave in June of 63 at American University, which was an outreach to the Soviet Union for détente. And that was very threatening to the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs and the Cold Warriors out there. So I think those are, we can speculate, but we can also look at documents. And I think the documents are one of the best ways that we can understand what happened in 63. Um,
Yeah, we
yeah.
started out this broadcast interviewing Julian Assange's wife, and we believe that he has, because he was exposing the military-industrial complex, that he suffered that the price he's suffering. But that is obviously, if you look at it in terms of economics and money, that is the biggest entity, isn't it? The most money is made from war, so that would be one of the primary reasons in this case. Now, earlier this year, I interviewed Michael Francis of the Colombo crime family, and his dad had inside information on the mafia's role or interest in the assassination. And he told me that, if you go look at the history of the Kennedys, the bootlegging, they had mafia connections, and they used that money and those connections to gain political power. But then when Robert became the lawyer, that he said he was going to smash up the mafia. So it was as if he'd turned on them after they helped him get into that position. Do you believe that there is a world where the intelligence agencies and the mafia coexist to perform these assassinations, and that what I just said, what Michael Francis said, did indeed play a role in the assassination?
Uh, in short answer, yes, 100%. Um, what we know from the documents about Operation Mongoose, for instance, is that was a joint CIA, Mafia, FBI assassination program to get Castro. And it's not a far-fetched idea to just assume that was turned inward. Um, and the mob would be in a perfect position to bring in assassins that couldn't be traced to any US based intelligence organization. They could arrange safe houses, they could arrange ways to get people in and out. So it's highly likely, in my opinion, and from what other researchers have determined, was that the mob was heavily involved. Um, but in the end, there were things that happened that the mob couldn't pull off, like stand down orders of um, military personnel, and my father's story about not being scrambled, um, and the log books. I mean the code books being pulled from long range bombers the day of the assassination. So um, the mob was heavily involved, but they couldn't do it all.
Yeah, I love that answer. That was great. Going back to the researchers, then, I'm a huge fan of Jim Marrs. I've got some of his books on my shelves behind me.
Mhm.
So you said that these citizen researchers were responsible for 13 million pages of documents. So what's the current status of the documents?
Well, under the JFK Records Act, all of the documents were due to be released in late October 2017. And that was by congressional order 25 years after the JFK Records Act was signed. and the documents were due to be released completely unredacted, no blackouts at all, and only there's a stipulation that only the sitting president could delay the release. And so however one might feel about Donald Trump, most researchers believed that he would not hold up the release of the final batch of documents. But he indeed did, and kicked the can down the road to um, Joe Biden. And Joe Biden kicked the can down the road even longer. So we have to wait until um, I believe, yeah, I'm unclear about when the next date is, but it's we're still waiting on the most important CIA volumes. There are 5 volumes that we're waiting on from the CIA documents, and approximately 52,000 pages are remaining to be released. Um, and oddly enough, not oddly enough, it's it's the Secret Service, upon when the Assassination Records Review Board was convened, the they were given access to all records. The Secret Service destroyed all of their records pertaining to the assassination before the review board could get their hands on them. And that's noted in the review board's final report, but they decided not to make a big stink about it in the early days of their investigation. So there we are. We're still waiting on documents that are 59 years old to be released. And of course, that begs the question, if it was a lone nut, a lone communist sympathizer who wanted fame and had no other connections, why would the documents still be withheld after 59 years?
What was the
It's,
role of the Cold War in this?
oh, I think everything. I think everything. When Kennedy came into office, of course, he was considered a Cold Warrior. Um, he had served in World War II, and he brought on a lot of Cold Warriors into his administration. Um, but he changed after the Bay of Pigs, and then after the Cuban Missile Crisis, as well as the death of his son Patrick. He had a massive shift, and he changed, and he wanted to end the Cold War. And as you said earlier, war is the most profitable thing in our society, in any society. And and Kennedy was dedicated to ending the Cold War. And so I think, you've alluded to it, but I think that that was the main reason that he was killed, that he wanted to end the Cold War. He, I don't know if you've read the letters between Khrushchev and Kennedy, but there's a whole canon of literature that's in the Kennedy Presidential Library that you can get online and check out and read for yourself. And it's this back and forth of beautiful letters of them talking about peace and how do we do that, and the pressures that they were both facing at home, from hardliners and people who wanted war, people who didn't trust the other side, who would never trust the other side. But those two men did. They trusted each other, and they were both committed to ending the Cold War. And so, not long after Kennedy was assassinated, Khrushchev was, run out of office and went into exile, um, and was basically emasculated politically.
So we had Tim Tate on last year. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's written extensively about Saran and Kennedy's brother getting assassinated, and he's a very eloquent speaker. And he convinced us that Saran couldn't possibly have fired all of those bullets. Have you researched that assassination as well?
A little bit, yeah. And of all the major political assassinations of the 60s, um, that is probably the most clear cut that Sirhan could not have fired the fatal shots um, that killed Robert Kennedy. The autopsy report by Noguchi stated that the shots were fired at point blank range behind him, from behind. And Sirhan was never, closer than 3 feet in front of him. So, and Kennedy was only hit by 2 bullets, and they were both fired from behind. No bullets hit him from the front, where Sirhan was. Sirhan certainly fired a weapon that day. He hit a few people and fired into the ceiling and into the walls. But of all the assassinations, that's the most clear cut, just from the autopsy report.
So you're in the process of creating The Searchers Part 2?
I
So
am.
which areas are you going to dive deeper into?
Well, one area is the notion that critics or counter critics to the Warren Report, or critics to the researchers, say that someone would have talked over all these years. And so a large portion of my film will be about all the people that did talk. And there were hundreds of people who did talk, but no one listened. They went to the Washington Post and to the New York Times and to the FBI and to the Chicago Tribune, and no one talked. And they then go to the Rolling Stone and even periodicals like Playboy and Penthouse, just to be able to tell their story, but no one listened. And so that's going to be a huge part of my film. And interviewing researchers that I wasn't able to interview for part 1.
I can't wait to see part 1 now after speaking to you. Where can we watch part 1?
Well, if you go to my website, thesearchersfilm.com, there's links to where you can watch it, and also purchase old school DVDs for those listeners who might still have DVD players. But
and for the viewers then who've watched you this evening, where can they support you and follow you online?
Oh yeah, at the film site, thesearchersfilm.com.
All right, Randy, really appreciate you spending time with us today, and we wish you all the best in part 2. You take care, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.